Good day, grade 12 learners of South Africa. Welcome to Mindset and to Life Sciences. Now, we have gone through the whole reproductive structures of males and females. We've also done gametogenesis, which is the formation of the gametes in both the male and the female. And we are now going to go through hormonal control in the female, because we've done the male already in the previous session. Now we're going to just go through the female. All right, so we had human reproduction, hormonal control, fertilization, and implantation. Moving along, we start off first of all with the hormonal control in oogenesis. Remember oogenesis, the creation of the female egg cell. So hormones control the menstrual cycle or menstruation cycle. The cycle takes about 28 days. Now remember, the first day, so day 1, is the start of the period. In other words, menstruation. It's just, there we go, menstruation. Now, only one egg is released per cycle, one from the left ovary in the 1 month and one from the right ovary in the next month. People, every now and again, you're going to find that the ovaries, both ovaries, left and right, will release an egg. When that happens, there's a possibility you can end up with fraternal twins. In other words, dizygotic twins. They are twins that are unidentical. They may look very similar, they may be different sexes, they may be the same sexes, but each egg is then fertilized. And that, they say, happens approximately every 3 years in a female's body. It's not genetic, and if you end up with twins then, well, it was just that there were 2 little egg cells that decided to come down each ovary. But normally, it'll be one ovary releases an egg cell, and the next month, the next ovary. In cases where one ovary is damaged, we end up with only one ovary producing egg cells, and it will produce the egg cell every month, which means that the woman will become infertile very quickly. Why? Because when we are born with the number of egg cells we are going to have during our lives. At birth, not like men or males that produce sperm from the day they reach maturity to the day they die. They produce sperm. With females, we have a finite number of egg cells that we're born with. If damage occurs to one of those ovaries, then we end up with only half the egg cells. And then those egg cells are released quicker, and the lady will then, or the female will then become infertile at an early age. Alrighty, so we have one egg from each ovary, left and right, per cycle. The menstruation cycle affects both ovaries and the uterus at the same time. The gonadotrophin releasing hormone, that's GnRH, you can use that abbreviation. What does it do? It stimulates the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland to release follicle stimulating hormone. And that will be a negative feedback system as well. So your gonadotrophic releasing hormone tells the pituitary gland, listen, hun, you need to now release follicle stimulating hormone. And then we're going to have the release of a follicle. So what I want to show you here, and this is something they can give you in an exam. All right, they can give you all 4 processes. Now, if you look here, there you've got the thickness of the endometrium. Now, the endometrium is the inner lining of the uterus. There is the ovary and what's happening to the egg cell in the ovary until it is released. Once it is released here, that would be ovulation. All right, and then the corpus luteum will form, and when the corpus luteum forms, it releases luteinizing hormone, which causes the release of progesterone. And that progesterone is what will keep a baby inside during pregnancy. So you need to know these 4 graphs as they work together. Clearly, your days and time, the start of menstruation would be day 1. Okay, so there's day 1. So we start off with 0. There would be day 1, there is day 3, there is day 5, and so we carry on. So at approximately day 14, we have ovulation. The egg is released. We have an incredible amount of luteinizing hormone and a very, very high amount of follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, and huge amounts of estrogen. Now remember, your follicle stimulating hormone and your estrogen those two work with each other. Follicle stimulating hormone will cause the release of estrogen, and luteinizing hormone will then cause the release of progesterone. Progesterone to ensure pregnancy occurs. Estrogen to cause ovulation. Remember the O's? And there's your ovulation. The secondary oocyte is released. And here, your corpus luteum will cause the release of progesterone. Why? Because the luteinizing hormone will stimulate it to release progesterone. If the egg is not fertilized, the corpus luteum will disintegrate, and your levels of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone will decrease. Therefore, your progesterone and your estrogen will decrease. And the lining will then decide to break away because there's nothing to keep that lining in place. The lining is only there so that if an egg has been fertilized, it will implant in one of these little cavities here and sit and lodge there and grow. All right, now, this is the process. Remember, they work, there's negative feedback. So you have your follicle stimulating hormone, it's released by the pituitary, it travels to the ovaries. And it says to the ovaries, listen, please, can we sort the follicle out? The follicle will now develop, and as that follicle develops, it's going to cause the release of estrogen. Estrogen has two target organs. People remember, a hormone always, it's a chemical messenger. It's made of protein, except your estrogen and your progesterone and testosterone, the sex hormones. Why? They're only made of fat. Now, your chemical messenger, in this case estrogen, will travel to the target organ and cause the target organ to perform a function. In this case, it's the uterus and the anterior pituitary gland. In the uterus, it tells the uterus, listen, you need to make sure that that endometrium, that inner lining of the uterus is thick and it's ready for implantation. It must be ready for pregnancy, okay? Also, the estrogen is going to inhibit the secretion of follicle stimulating hormone. It doesn't want more follicle stimulating hormone because the egg cell's been released now during ovulation. You don't want another egg cell being released 2 or 3 days later. You want that egg cell to be released and it must be sitting there waiting to be fertilized. Okay? So the estrogen, high levels of estrogen say, oi, pituitary, stop producing follicle stimulating hormone. All right? Because high estrogen levels will trigger the secretion of luteinizing hormone, and we don't want that. Okay. Luteinizing hormone is released into the blood and is transported to the ovary and causes ovulation. All right, ovulation is the release of the secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle. You see, ovulation has occurred. That follicle has now released the oocyte. Okay, once it releases the oocyte, the Graafian follicle closes up again. And as it closes up again, it forms the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum secretes estrogen and huge amounts of progesterone. The progesterone ensures the thickening of the endometrium, because remember, it's a hormone. It will just say, oi, endometrium, estrogen made you nice and thick, now you need to stay nice and thick, just in case this little egg gets fertilized. Progesterone then inhibits the anterior lobe to produce luteinizing hormone. We don't want the estrogen, we don't want the luteinizing hormone, because if that egg has been fertilized, we need high levels of progesterone to keep that little egg in place so that it can implant and it can grow into an embryo. Okay? Sorry. You don't want more estrogen being released and you don't want more follicle stimulating hormone to be. You don't want another follicle. We're busy working with this one now. Okay, it's like, sorry, when you are busy with something and someone comes and says, no, you must do that. And you say, wait a minute, let me finish this job and then I can move on to that job. Now that's what's happening here. The release of the progesterone causes a slight rise in temperature, and that is when we know we're ovulating. This slight increase of the temperature in the female during ovulation, that's what people use as a technique when they, for birth control. All right, they work on temperature. So if fertilization does not take place, okay, it doesn't take place, the corpus luteum's got no function, because why is it there? It's producing mainly progesterone. And it says, well, hold on, fertilization didn't take place. I'm here producing progesterone so that the uterus lining can be all nice and thick and ready for implantation. But oh my gosh, it didn't work this month. No fertilization, so what must we do? We've now got to tear down the lining so we can start again and build a new lining in case the next egg for next month is fertilized. And that is the problem here, because the body knows that there's a lack of estrogen, there's a lack of progesterone, and that causes what we call PMS in women. And it is it's a real thing, because mentally your brain is saying, you did not succeed in what you were put on this planet to do. You are not going to be reproducing. You have failed. And on a very deep-centered psychological level, the woman feels, okay, I've been unsuccessful. I have failed in ensuring that my species is procreated, that my species can continue. And that lack of estrogen and progesterone, some women can get quite violent, and it's what we call PMS. All right, so the result is a decrease in the levels of estrogen and progesterone, very important, and the endometrium breaks down and tears away, and that's when we have menstruation. All right, that's the bleeding. We also call it having a period. Now, menstruation lasts for about 5 days. In some women, menstruation can last 6 or 7 days. In others, 2 or 3 days. The norm is 5 days. It does not mean that you are bleeding to death or that you haven't bled enough. Okay, it depends on you and your body and how active you are and the sport you do and whether you're overweight or underweight. All of that plays a role. Remember, if you're underweight, you're going to have less fat in your body. And what are estrogen and progesterone made of? They are made of fat. So you are going to find that your cycles will be messed up if you've lost a lot of weight or you are underweight because of illnesses or whatever the case is, or stress. Okay, here we go. Now, what I did was I put together a sort of a flow chart for you to show you the negative feedback. Now remember, negative feedback is if something goes too high, something kicks in to make it less. If something is too low, something kicks in to fix it. Okay, and this is all your hormonal processes. So let's start here. We have the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland releases follicle-stimulating hormone. Follicle-stimulating hormone causes the ripening of the Graafian follicle. So now we've got the follicle getting ready, and the follicle will then release the egg during ovulation only when estrogen is released. So follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates the Graafian follicle to ripen, and it stimulates the production of estrogen. What does estrogen do? Estrogen says, oi, pituitary, no more follicle-stimulating hormone. Inhibit it. Stop it from happening. And estrogen will cause the repair of the uterine lining, that's endometrium, and ovulation. Now the little egg cell's ready and it gets released. Joops. Out comes the little egg cell. From the ovary, it gets taken into the fallopian tubes. This high level here of estrogen stimulates more luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone, what does it do? It causes ovulation, make sure that the ovulation happens, and it causes the development of the corpus luteum from the Graafian follicle. Okay, what it also does is it's going to cause the release or stimulate the release of progesterone. What does progesterone do? It maintains the lining of the uterus, and it prepares the lining of the uterus for the implantation of the blastocyst. Now remember, the blastocyst is when the little egg cell that's now been fertilized by a sperm cell has reached a certain stage of development. All of that happens in the fallopian tube, and then it drops into the uterus. And it's got to find a nice little place to hook in so that this little baby can develop, because fertilization has occurred. All right, now, what else happens? Apart from progesterone, high levels of progesterone stopping or inhibiting the production of luteinizing hormone, high levels of progesterone is going to cause inhibit the release of follicle-stimulating hormone. Why? Because your progesterone, remember the P for progesterone and P for pregnancy. In other words, we want to keep that baby there. We don't want the lining to come down. The minute follicle-stimulating hormone gets released, it's going to cause estrogen to be released. And what does estrogen do? It's going to cause ovulation to happen. So what do you want? You want that lining to be perfect for the baby during pregnancy. So that's why progesterone will inhibit the release of follicle-stimulating hormone. So no more follicles are released until this little baby has now grown to a point where it can develop. Okay, question 1. People, pay attention. This, if I was giving you a question, setting your paper, I would put something along these lines in, because this shows you understand. So this is your pituitary, or hypophysis is another name for pituitary. Those are the hormone levels. Now remember, the pituitary releases follicle-stimulating hormone, and it also releases luteinizing hormone. You have your ovarian hormones. Follicle-stimulating hormone will cause the release of estrogen, and luteinizing hormone is going to cause the release of progesterone. Okay, now what do we want here? We want to have a look at the growth of the follicle. So the follicle develops, and it develops because of follicle-stimulating hormone. And eventually, here at this point, we have ovulation at day 14. All right? And then the corpus luteum has formed here, and eventually the corpus luteum will disintegrate, and the lining on day 28 will now start to break away, and we start here again. Okay, so that's what you can see here. So let's have a look at our questions. On which day does ovulation take place? Well, I told you here it will be on day 14. There, it's when your luteinizing hormone and your follicle-stimulating hormone are all at a peak, and when this little egg cell there, that little oocyte, is released out of the Graafian follicle. There's your Graafian follicle. Okay, so it's day 14. Okay, now we look at between which days does menstruation take place. So again, we go back here and we say, right, where would menstruation? It's approximately day 1 or day from naught. So we've got day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It will be about there. So it's approximately day 1 or day naught of the cycle to day 5. So between the days does menstruation take place? It's going to take place between day 1 and day 5. Okay? State any one function of luteinizing hormone. All we need to do, people, is go back to this cycle here. You must know this. I've put it in your X sheets. It's in the X sheets. Please make sure that you learn it, all right? So here, what do we have? Estrogen is going to cause the repair of the uterine lining and ovulation, and progesterone maintains the lining of the uterus wall to prepare for implantation of the blastocyte. Also, progesterone will inhibit the release of follicle-stimulating hormone, and estrogen is going to stimulate, high levels will stimulate more luteinizing hormone. So there you've got your answers there. Okay? So one function of luteinizing hormone, it's going to make sure that ovulation does take place, and it's going to make sure that the corpus luteum produces the progesterone, and it's also going to make sure that that lining is ready for reception of the fertilized egg. Okay, then here, describe the changes in the level of luteinizing hormone shown in the diagram, or in the graph. So the levels of luteinizing hormone. So here you've got to explain the changes. So why would these changes have taken place? If you look here, as the luteinizing hormone increases, so the follicle stimulating hormone will increase, but estrogen is going, as the estrogen level increases, it's going to cause or stimulate the release of luteinizing hormone. But as the progesterone level increases, it's going to inhibit the amount of luteinizing hormone that's in the blood. And that, people, is as simple as that. You're merely explaining what you see on the graph. Okay, describe the relationship between the level of estrogen and the endometrium from day 7 to day 14. So let's go back to our graph. I'm not going to write this out, so please listen. Okay, we want to know the lining of the uterus, okay, versus, sorry, I've just gone a bit of a blank here. Let's just see here. Level of estrogen and the endometrium. All right, so we look here. The level of estrogen, as it increases, it's very low here during day 1 to 5. Why? Because menstruation takes place. Now, as the estrogen level increases here, as the estrogen level starts to increase, so the lining of the endometrium increases in thickness. Okay? Then our estrogen level peaks at ovulation, and our endometrium is now nice and thick. But as the estrogen level starts to decrease, so the progesterone level starts to increase. And the progesterone level's job is to make sure that we maintain the thickness of the endometrium, whereas estrogen's job is to make sure that the endometrium becomes thicker so that it's able to have implantation take place. Okay. Just look at your graph and explain what you see. Okay, explain why it is necessary for the levels of progesterone in the blood to increase after ovulation. Now, think about it, people. The corpus luteum releases the progesterone, all right? Why do we have to have a whole lot of progesterone in our bodies? Number one, it maintains the lining of the endometrium, okay? Why? Because it has to be nice and thick and glandular and have a good blood supply, so that if that little egg cell that was fertilized now is in a blastocyte state, it has to implant in that endometrium. It's got to be thick and glandular and ready to support a new baby growing there. Okay. But by the same token, your progesterone has to inhibit here. The progesterone must inhibit the release of follicle stimulating hormone. So that is why we're going to have high levels of progesterone. We don't want follicle stimulating hormone. We want to sort this job out first before we move on to the next one. So your body's saying, hold on there, follicle stimulating hormone, no more follicles. Let's sort this one out first. If it is fertilized, we can have a new baby. If it isn't, well, then we start the whole process again. But in the meantime, don't release any follicles now, please. Let's deal with this one here. So it stands to reason. Okay, did fertilization take place on the 28th day of the cycle, illustrated in the graph? Now we go back to our graph, and they want to know here, after 28 days, did fertilization take place? Now, had fertilization taken place, this corpus luteum would not have disintegrated. Here, it's starting to disintegrate. It's useless. And if it hadn't have done that, well, guess what? Then it meant that this lining would have stayed, and we would have carried on with pretty much the same as from day 21. So here, fertilization did not take place. Okay, now we move on to fertilization. All right, fertilization First of all, we have meiosis takes place in the ovaries and the testes. So ovaries will be in the female, and the testes are in all males. Okay, what do we end up with? We end up with haploid sperm from the males, from the testes, and egg cells from the female. Reproduction is a process to bring the sperm cells and the egg cells together so that fertilization can take place. Now think about it. I've got an egg cell here. I've got a sperm cell here. Okay? How do we get the two of them together? Because fertilization can only take place when they are together, when they are near each other. All right, so the result of fertilization, when it occurs, when we've brought the two, the sperm cells and the egg cells together, fertilization ends up in a diploid zygote. Haploid plus haploid equals diploid. Okay, the zygote, what do we have there? In here, we're going to have a combination of the male and the female's gametes and hereditary characteristics, okay, from both the mother and the father. Okay, people, before fertilization can occur, we need to bring the male and the female together. How do we do that in humans? We have a process called copulation. And copulation is what we call sexual, because it's going to be sexual reproduction, intercourse. Okay. We need to get the male sperm into the female. So we say, right, how do humans reproduce? Guess what? We have internal fertilization because our little babies have to grow inside the uterus. So it's inside. Sperm cells are inserted into the vagina of the female by a process called copulation. Okay, the male must first receive stimulation from the parasympathetic nervous system. Now remember, parasympathetic is part of your autonomic nervous system, all right? It has to, the whole autonomic nervous system works so that it works without the will. That is why males will be stimulated by things that they see in a picture or in a movie, or they can smell a girl and she smells nice and they'll have all kinds of sexual thoughts and immediately they will have an erection. It is nature's way of making sure that that penis is hard enough to actually be able to insert into the vagina to ejaculate the sperm or get the sperm to the little egg. And there's nothing rude or nasty or ugly about sexual intercourse, okay? It is, the copulation process is natural. It's us as human beings, we make it unsavory, all right? But it's not. It's natural. And the way the male's body reacts is because they're carrying a whole bunch of sperm around and they've got this innate need to procreate. Okay? Females have an innate need to procreate as well. Even though we don't think we want that, we do. That's why we get PMS when we don't have a fertilized egg. Alrighty, now, the penis becomes erect. Why? Because of vasodilation. In other words, vaso is the vascular system, the blood vessels. The blood vessels get larger, they dilate, and lots more blood flows through, and it's that blood that makes the penis engorged. The tissue becomes engorged, and the penis then increases in blood volume. All right, so there's no bone there, contrary to what a lot of people think, oh, that there's a bone. There's no bone in the penis. What happens is the blood vessels will dilate, a lot more blood will flow into the penile structure, the tissue the tissue becomes engorged, and it then becomes hard and full. It's blood that makes that happen. The erect penile tissue causes the valve of the urethra to close. Why would that be important? What do we get through that urethra? Okay, it's the valve of the urethra to close. That closing of the urethra is because we don't want urine. So it's the urethra high up from the bladder. Now, the rhythmic movement of copulation, all right, there's a movement, and that rhythmic movement causes the smooth muscles of the epididymis. Remember, that's where the spermies are stored. And the vas deferens is the part that they're going to swim up. And the seminal vesicles, because they release a seminal fluid. The Cowper's gland and the prostate. All three of those structures release fluid which makes up the semen. And the semen is that fluid plus the little sperm cells. And they start contracting. And these wave-like contractions is what causes ejaculation and what we refer to as human beings as an orgasm. All right. So males, in order to get their sperm out, they can only do that when they ejaculate. And the ejaculation will be in the form of what we call an orgasm. Okay. The semen is alkaline, and this is important for you to know. And to decrease the normal vaginal acidity to a pH of 6. Because in the vagina, it's normally a little acidic. And you don't want to mess with the pH because you don't want to kill the sperm cells. Remember, the sperm cells are made of protein, people. And if it's too acid or too alkali, you're going to denature the proteins. The sperm is then deposited into the vagina and very close to the cervix. Because people remember, the vagina goes up like that. Come on, we did the female structure. Then you've got the cervix sitting here. And that little hole that goes through there, and then you go into the uterus. All right? And now from the uterus, you've got the fallopian tubes that run off on the side like that. So here, we want the penis to go into the female's vagina here, and when the male ejaculates, that sperm doesn't have a long way to go to get through the cervix, into the uterus, and in up to the fallopian tubes. All right, the sperm swim by means of cilia, and they travel to the uterus and into the fallopian tubes right there. And that is where fertilization. Now remember, they don't know that, hold on, this month it was this side ovary that produced egg cells, or this side that produced egg cells. So they sort of do a split thing. They sort of get in here, and some swim this way and some swim that way, hoping that they're going to find a little egg here that is ready to be fertilized. Okay? Now, please understand and remember this. Sperm cells will survive in the fallopian tubes for up to 3 days, okay? 3 whole days. They can sit there. So, in other words, your male sperm survive for about 3 days, okay? 3.5 days. Those little male sperms survive there. The female sperm, because remember XY sperm, the female sperm, the male sperm will survive for 48 hours. The female sperm survives for about 3 days. So if that little egg cell becomes ripe while the male cells are busy floating around and they're all healthy and ready, then you end up with a boy. If it's a female cell that gets along there and the male cells have all died because they're smaller and they swim faster, but they can't carry enough food to survive for longer than 2 days, then the little female sperm comes along and says, I'm here, come, and it joins with the egg cell, and then we have a little girl. So all the little girls out there, you were created by sperm cells that are stronger and slower, but carried more food in the food pack. And they were able to survive for longer. All right, here we go. This I took for Ladies by Ladies. It's a lovely website for the girls out there. There's a little sperm cell, and here's the egg, and it's a whole bunch of them are swimming to this little egg cell. And it wants to get in there. Now, fertilization, people. What do we have? Fertilization, you must know this. It is your definition. Is the fusion of the sperm nucleus with the egg cell nucleus to form a diploid zygote. Haploid nucleus, diploid nucleus. Okay. Diploid zygote contains 46 chromosomes, because remember we're talking about human reproduction. In the nucleus, 23 from daddy, 23 from mommy. So 23 from the sperm and 23 from the egg. Capacitation, okay, takes place in the fallopian tubes. This is the process where those sperm cells mature before fertilization of the egg can take place. So they first have to mature, and that's capacitation. They become capacitated. Okay? Then the enzymes are released, and the sperm head comes into contact with the jelly coat around the egg cell. Now I'm going to show you this. There's the little sperm cell. There's the egg cell. Very, very close up. And what happens here is as it hits that jelly, your enzymes now start to work its way through the little egg cell. But this little egg cell will only allow one sperm in ever. Okay, one egg cell allows one sperm cell to enter it. It doesn't need this tail, so as that head goes through, this tail breaks off because it's no longer necessary. Okay, here is okay, look, this is a very complex diagram. The reason I put it in was to show you the different steps. So here's our little sperm cell, and the sperm comes along. There's a jelly coat around the little egg cell, and it starts to release the acrosome, which is the head around the tip of the head of the sperm cell, starts to release enzymes, and it eventually bores through here, and the little male nucleus is released into the egg cytoplasm. Okay, so those are the steps that happen, and the tail breaks off. We don't want the tail, we only want that. We want the nucleus. Now, only the head and the neck of the sperm will enter the egg. The tail is discarded and is left outside. When the sperm cell enters the egg cell, a membrane immediately forms around to stop any other sperm cells from going in. If any other sperm cells do go through, the egg will be aborted, spontaneously aborted. Okay, now, because remember, if another sperm cell goes in there, we're going to end up with something that is triploid and that we can't have in human beings. Now, the two nuclei form and fertilization has taken place. When fertilization has happened, we've got our diploid zygote, and we say now conception is complete. So, don't confuse conception with copulation. Copulation is to get the penis into the vagina so we can get the sperm cells to the egg cells. Then fertilization takes place. But before fertilization can take place, those little male cells, those sperm cells must mature. That's capacitation. They become capacitated. Then the little head goes in, the tail breaks off, and that nucleus joins with the female nucleus. Only then has fertilization taken place. Copulation, conception is when that sperm cell enters that egg cell and fertilization takes place. We now have a new organism that's developed called by conception. Okay, you must know this diagram. I'm going to put here NB so that you do not forget. It's in your egg sheets. Make sure you learn it. This is a section through a female's piece of her uterus and the fallopian tube and the ovary over here. So these are the fimbriae at the end of the fallopian tube. Remember, they make a wave-like motion. The ovary releases the egg cell. This would be your Graafian follicle. When it is ready, it releases that egg cell. The egg cell then cruises along. The fimbriae make wave-like motions, and they wave that egg into the fallopian tube. This is the fallopian tube. All right? The little spermies come in, and they're all swimming like anything to get to the egg cell. They get here, the egg is ready, and after 2 or 3 days, those little sperm cells are all very mature, and they go into the egg cell. Tail breaks off, and the little male gamete sits there. Fertilization takes place, they become one. Now, mitosis takes place, people. Mitosis, you go from one cell to two, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8, and then we end up with a structure called a morula. And that morula is after about 2 or 3 days. This is all the uterus. There's a beautiful, nice, thick uterine lining of the endometrium, and the little egg goes in, at least this fertilized egg cell or morula goes into the uterus at this point. Now, just remember, the fallopian tube's got a whole little bunch of like cilia all along here, and they have wave-like motion. So they're pushing this little egg along and pushing it along. Little egg gets here, and when it's in a blastocyte state, it now starts to embed. And what we have here is little fimbriae develop on this side and on this side, and we've got the chorionic villi will cause the attachment into this uterus, and that will eventually form the placenta. Okay. Something else you've got to remember is if this egg is not fertilized, the little cilia in the fallopian tubes will push the egg through and the egg will just come down. Okay, it just comes down and out through the cervix and the vagina, and you can't really see it. So this is very important once this blastocyte has formed and we have implantation taking place. This is what the whole preparation is for. Right, fertilization takes place in the fallopian tubes. They ask that. They ask it every single year. Where does fertilization take place? In the fallopian tubes. The zygote is pushed towards the uterus by muscle contractions. The process takes about 3 days. The zygote undergoes mitosis because it's for growth and development, and divides to form a solid ball called a morula. The morula, after about 6 days, develops into a blastula and attaches to the lining of the uterus, and that attaching to the lining of the uterus, there's your definition, is called implantation. Now this little embryo can start growing. Once that implantation has taken place, we say the female is now pregnant. So we have gestation. Pregnant is having something growing inside you. Gestation is the amount of time it takes for that thing growing inside you to develop into something that you can give birth to. Okay? So I'm using the word thing here very loosely. So that's just to explain the concept to you. All right, so pregnant means that, well, you are with child. But gestation is the actual period it takes for the baby and the development during that pregnancy period. Okay, the outer layer of the blastula is called the trophoblast, and that develops into the chorion. Now remember, the chorion, very important. Now the chorion has finger-like outgrowths called the chorionic villi. Villi are little outgrowths, and they grow into the endometrium, as I've just explained to you now, and they anchor that developing embryo, and they also increase the surface area, because remember, they're growing into it at an angle. All right, here we have a picture of the chorionic villi. This is what's happening in the umbilical cord. There's the umbilical cord going to the baby. So we've taken this area of the placenta and we've enlarged it. The chorionic villi from the baby grow in here, into the chorion. Okay, there's the cervix, the vagina would clearly be from there. Here's our little fetus. Now remember, fetus is spelled F-O-E-T-U-S in South Africa. If you're going American, it's F-E-T-U-S. We all know the Americans can't spell. So it's the same thing. You choose which way you want to spell it, but they're both correct. There's the uterus, and there's our little baby. All right, and the chorionic villi that have now created this will create the placenta. And remember, the placenta is a sort of a barrier between the mother and the baby through which your fluids are going to flow. All right. Here it says the diagram below represents a part of the human female reproductive system after copulation has taken place. Okay? Study the diagram and answer the questions that follow. Okay, what have we got here? We've got this beautiful structure, and in the structure we have the ovary, we've got the egg. Okay, let's look at our labels. First label, so A would be the ovary. B, we've got the Graafian follicle, which releases the egg, so this would be ovulation. Okay, there's ovary. Okay, if we look at C, what is that? That's going to be our little egg cell, or we can call it an ovule. All right, D, their fertilization has taken place, so this is my fertilized egg cell, so it's my diploid zygote. Okay, now E and F. F, at this point here, we're looking at our morula. All right. F, E, I would say, is the fallopian tube. because it's not pointing to any structure here, it's just this area here. G is the endometrium, okay, of the uterus, if you really want to be technical, and H are our little sperm cells. Alrighty. Give labels for A, E, and G. Well, we've given labels for all of them, so we can just have a look at that back just now. Okay, name the process that takes place at B. So if we look at the process that took place at B, B there was ovulation. Okay. Question 3. When during the menstruation cycle does the process mentioned in question 2 take place? So when will it take place? At approximately day 14. So I'd put approximately day 14. Remember, day 1 is the start of menstruation. That's always day 1 of the cycle. So it starts at day 1, and you have menstruation for 5 days, then the lining builds up, ovulation takes place at day 14. That gave it enough time for the estrogen to make sure that that lining is good, that it's a nice, thick, spongy, glandular lining. Now describe the process mentioned by D, and D was A, B, C, D. There we have a diploid zygote, so if it's a process, it would be fertilization. So describe the process represented by D. It is fertilization. And what happens at fertilization? It is when we have a haploid male gamete fuses or fuses with a haploid female gamete to form a what? Come on, people. A diploid zygote. Now remember, your zygote will develop into an embryo. The embryo will develop into a fetus, and the fetus will eventually be the baby that is pushed out at birth. Okay? Then write down the number of chromosomes that would be present in the nucleus of cell C and cell F and cell H. Okay, so it's C, F, and H. So let's go back to our diagram. I'm going to write it here. So C, F, and H. So we want to know whether it's haploid or diploid. So if we look at C, C is going to be haploid. And we look at F, if it's fertilized, it's going to be diploid. And H is the sperm cell, it is haploid, and that's what they wanted you to do. So that's what you had to answer there. So that was the egg cell is haploid. Okay, it would be N, and this would be diploid. It would be 2N, and haploid 1N. Okay. Now pregnancy, people. Pregnancy, what are we going to have? We've got, it's the development of that little embryo inside the uterus. The process is also called gestation. That's the period of growth. Plants germinate and animals gestate. The embryo develops as follows. Okay? The development of the placenta and the amnion, you've got to know these because they protect that baby. Okay, the placenta forms a link between the mother and the fetus. So there is no direct transfer of the mother's blood to the baby. It goes through that placenta. So the placenta develops after about 12 weeks. And that's a problem. Now remember, when a woman comes into contact, who's pregnant, comes into contact with German measles, If it's in her first trimester, in other words, the first 3 months or 12 weeks, her baby can be infected with that German measles virus. Okay, that's why they say that women that are pregnant in their first 3 months, stay away from anyone who has German measles, because it can deform and mess up your embryo. Okay, why? Because the placenta isn't in place yet. So those first 12 weeks are very important. After conception, why? Because only once that placenta is in place does it allow for safe exchange of a number of substances. Now, people, we have to look at these substances. Because remember, before this, it's just the chorionic villi that are doing their job. Okay, what passes through that placenta? The nutrients, oxygen, hormones, and antibodies. And they're all going from the mother to her baby. All right, so the nutrients, you've got to feed that fetus. It needs to grow. Oxygen, there's no energy in the cells to grow if there isn't oxygen. Hormones, to tell those cells to grow. And antibodies, to make sure that this little thing is perfect and looked after. Carbon dioxide and wastes, they're coming from the baby. The fetus is using the oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. It's using the nutrients and releasing wastes. That has to go to the mother, and the mother has to excrete it. Now, harmful substances. And ladies, hopefully most of you will be mommies one day. Please look after your bodies and look after that baby when you are pregnant. Okay, every little thing you do impacts on that little baby's growth. Here we go. Nicotine, bad, 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 bad. You should not smoke when you are pregnant. Alcohol, definitely no alcohol. Okay? Drugs, viruses like rubella. You stay away from anyone who's got German measles. Hepatitis B, HIV, all of those can move through that placenta, and that creates a huge issue. Okay, this is what the placenta looks like. And this is why we have the placenta. Remember, here's your baby. So this is the baby sits here, the fetus. And I use baby so that you can relate to what I'm talking about. There's your baby, or the fetus sits this side. Here's the umbilical cord. That's what they're going to cut when the baby's born. Okay, now we have the umbilical artery, and let's see if we can use, I'm going to use pink for artery. Okay, and clearly the darker one here that we have here is going to be the vein. Now the blood supply to the fetus is opposite to your blood supply. Okay, remember, here the artery is carrying blood away and the vein is carrying blood to. And you've got to remember that. This is your uterine vein. What is it doing? This goes into your uterine vein, and it carries all the wastes away from the baby. This is coming in from your uterine, from the uterus. So it's going to be the uterus artery, and that's going to take the blood to the baby. But it's called the vein in the umbilical cord and the artery taking the blood away from the baby. Why? Because this blood is going to be joining into your uterine structure here, and it's going to be going into your uterine vein. So this here is going to be your vein, the mother's vein, and this here is the mother's artery. So in the placenta, it's the opposite way around. So what carries good things to the baby will be via the umbilical vein, and what carries the bad things away and the wastes away from the baby will be the umbilical artery. And please remember that, people. It's the opposite way around. All right. The amnion is membranous in structure, develops around that baby, the amnion. And the amnion is going to contain amniotic fluid. So the amnion is this membrane, and inside this membrane, floating around there, we have the amniotic fluid. The fluid protects the baby how? And you've got to know this. These two you must know. By acting as a shock absorber, So if a mother was to fall, a pregnant lady was to fall on her stomach, she's got to fall on her stomach very hard to damage that little baby or that embryo. Very, very, very hard. Okay, because that fluid is there to protect that little thing. Secondly, because it's fluid, it keeps the temperature constant so that the little baby, the little embryo's body temperature doesn't fluctuate too much. So what is the function of the amniotic fluid, people? Acts as a shock absorber, and it regulates and maintains a constant body temperature. Okay, this diagram you must learn. I haven't got time to go through this diagram with you, but please make sure that you learn it. I'm going to put you learn well. Okay, and it is in your X sheets. So have a look here, it's in the X sheets. Okay, development of the fetus. Now what I did was I got some really nice diagrams from various sites on the website. This is from pregnancy.babygaga.com. This little thing here is 2 weeks. Now if you look at it, it's got a tail, and this looks very much, I would say, like something out of Nemo. Finding Nemo. Okay, this looks like a little fishy type thing. Now, this is an actual photo from Health State in Minnesota, USA. Here, that is 6 weeks. And at this point, you can hear the heartbeat. You can see everything. The tissues have, I mean, there's the beginning of a little hand and little legs and feet. And there's the heart has started. Heartbeat is there, people. And at 6 weeks, we happily abort. And people are quite happy. This here is your baby growing inside you. 7 weeks. And the reason I put this picture in from octopusmom.com, it's also a lovely website, is to show you at 7 weeks, that's the size of the baby. And it's sitting inside your uterus. And it's got little legs and little toes even. And it's got little arms and eyes and a little nose, although it's got a very funny shaped head, but it's a human being at that point. Okay, 10 weeks. Here it's still sitting inside, and it's a happy little baby, growing nicely. There's a lot of space. There's your bits of your chorionic villi floating around here, protecting. There's the amnion with the amniotic fluid, all protecting this little baby. 16 weeks. I mean, it doesn't look much different to this little one here, but if you look here, there you've got the little eyelid is developed, the ears have developed. There's the umbilical cord. This little thing here has got ribs. Everything here is now working. The brain, kidneys. 20 weeks. The photo taken here, this little one's actually sucking its thumb. I mean, it's starting to gnaw and suck its thumb. The eyes are perfect, the little nose, the little mouth. I mean, look at the fingers. You can almost at 20 weeks, okay, the nails aren't there, they're just like jelly. But it's there, the neck, 30 weeks. This I took from Ray's Health. This almost looks like a plastic doll, but it's not. This little thing's got its hand right at its mouth, and it's got its thumb stuck right in its mouth because it's busy. It's what do babies do? It's a natural instinctive thing to suck. Here this little thing is almost comforting itself. And at this point, they're taking up a lot of space inside that uterus. There's not a lot of space to move. This I took from Ray's Health. This is the fetus. It should be, we spell it F-O-E-T-U-S. In utero, inside the uterus. See how much space this baby's taken up. That's why the moms, when their babies move around, a pregnant mom will be walking along, she'll say, oh my gosh, I need the loo now. And she'll need to wee like in the next 10 seconds because the baby has moved and bumped into her bladder. And she's got no control over it. It's like someone squashing your bladder. So there's this little thing now. It's ready. There's the umbilical cord. Placenta's all along here. There's the female anus, and I wanted to show you because this is the birth canal. There's your little fetus growing, or at this point it's almost a baby. There's the whole uterus, the amniotic sac. That's the sac that breaks and the water is released, and we say the water is broken. Here you have the cervix, and the cervix still has a nice fat plug in here. And that plug is only released when the baby is now ready to come out. Then here's the bladder. So no wonder, every time that baby moves, that bladder gets squished and the lady will have to urinate. There's the urethra. So there's the opening to the urethra. There's the vaginal opening, okay, all the way up here. And there's the anus. So now the pushing starts. Question 3, study the diagram of the developing fetus. Okay, so here we've got our little fetus developing. First thing you have to label is A. Okay, so what would A be? A is the placenta. All right, and B, I can't actually see very clearly here. I think it's pointing to the umbilical cord. Okay, C would be the amniotic. And remember, what does it do? It acts as a shock absorber and maintains the body temperature of the baby. D, this here would be the vagina. And E, now look carefully, people, there is the uterus. So this here, that is your endometrium. That's the inner lining of the uterus. This here are the muscles that are going to push that baby out. So they're going to be the uterine muscles. Okay, and it's those muscles that contract to force the little embryo out. Okay, label structures A, B, and D. So A was the placenta, B is the umbilical cord, and D was the vagina. Okay, give 2 functions of the fluid found in C. I told you, I warned you, this fluid, the amniotic fluid, they are always going to ask you. Now we know, one function of the amniotic fluid, act as a shock absorber. Okay. Okay, that's number 1. And number 2, it's going to maintain a constant body temperature of the fetus. It's that little fetus's body temperature it's going to keep constant. Now, name the process by which some of the fluid from C is withdrawn by doctors to test for abnormalities in the in the fetus. Come on, people, you've got to know this. It's called amnio, because it's from the amnion, the amniotic fluid, amniocentesis. Okay, amniocentesis, that's what they do. They draw that fluid out. Okay, describe the function of E during the birth process. Now, I can't remember what E was, so let's have a look. Ah, the uterine muscles. So come on, what do those uterine muscles do? They are going to, those are the uterine muscles, and they are going to contract. And why will they contract? They're going to contract because of oxytocin. That's a hormone released by the mother. Okay, remember oxytocin is also released by the pituitary gland. And what is that going to do? It causes those uterine muscles to contract and push that baby out. That's it for today. Remember that we need a male gamete and a female gamete. We need to get them together for fertilization to take place. So we have copulation, okay? The male will ejaculate his sperm into the female. The little spermies swim up into the fallopian tubes. As they swim up into the fallopian tubes, it depends on which ovary has produced an egg cell. The egg cell gets fertilized, and we now have a diploid zygote. Okay. Diploid zygote undergoes mitosis until it gets to a marilla stage. At a marilla stage, it starts to move down into the uterus. And the blastocyte stage is where it will implant into the uterine lining of the endometrium. Okay? The little blastocyte will then start releasing chorionic villi, and those chorionic villi will absorb nutrients from this very rich glandular endometrium till about 12 weeks. By that stage, the placenta has now developed nicely. Okay? That placenta functions to provide that little fetus, that growing fetus, with oxygen and nutrients and hormones and antibodies, and it takes away from that little fetus that's growing there, or embryo at that point, it takes away carbon dioxide and waste products, which is excreted by the mother's kidneys. All right? And you must remember that the amniotic fluid around the baby, shock absorber, and it controls and maintains a constant body temperature around the developing fetus. And that's where we're at. So we've had hormonal control in the female. We've got the fertilization. Fertilization has taken place through conception. New concept has been made. That's you, the baby. And you are then the whole process of implantation and development. And then we're going to go on next session where we're going to look at birth, the birth process, and all the issues that can take place, and also sexually transmitted diseases. We're going to look at contraception and how we prevent conception from taking place. Okay, peeps, there we go. Have an awesome time. Study hard. And remember, life science is all about your diagrams. So check your X sheets. Everything you need to know is in your X sheets, okay? So that and this, and I promise you now, you'll be okay. Have a good one. Bye-bye.